Hello, everyone. Welcome to week number 7. Hope you are doing well. So this week, we're going to be registering your systematic review or your scoping review. So why register? Well, registration is required by most journals now. It's required if you are doing a systematic review, and many journals are requiring it also if you do a scoping review. Last year, if you Google, do you have to register a scoping review? It would say, no, you don't have to. But I've come to find that many journals, even though they don't specifically state that you have to require it, once you start going through the review process, they ask if it was registered. And if it wasn't, they want you to register it at that point in time. The whole purpose of registering systematic reviews and scoping reviews is to cut down on the number of them that are done. For example, if you were to go and Google systematic reviews in Mediterranean diet, you might find multiple papers published in the same year. And the question is it valuable to have numerous similar reviews done? And so I think the scientific community suggests no, that maybe it's not. Maybe they should be done every few years. I don't think people are closely looking to see, oh, hey, this was a similar systematic review a year ago, and not publishing people based upon that. But I think it helps people to realize, oh, before I put all this work in, had there been something done recently, or is there a group currently working on something? When you go to a journal's website, in the instructions to authors section or the guide to authors section, they'll identify if they accept systematic reviews or scoping reviews. And if they do, they'll talk about registration. So, for example, this is from the International Journal of Sports Physical Therapy, and the International Journal of Sports Physical Therapy suggests registering with Prospero, but for them, it's not required. However, most other journals would require something like that. And in addition, they want to know that you have utilized the PRISMA either systematic review or scoping review checklist in order to make sure you've addressed everything that should be within a review article. Here's another one, Virtual Worlds. Virtual Worlds is the paper that Rachel published her scoping review in from last year's cohort, and they ask for a registration. They ask for the systematic review to follow the PRISMA guidelines. How about the JAAPA? There doesn't appear to be anything listed on their site. So if there's nothing listed, probably it's best to default to, yes, we did register it, and do that registration just because it seems to be the preferred process. Now, PRISMA, the PRISMA website here, there is the link to it. What is the PRISMA website? This is the preferred reporting items for systematic reviews and meta-analyses. So the name there is talking about systematic reviews, but they also have components for scoping reviews. I've provided a link to this website within this week's module. I've also provided a link to the PRISMA checklist. The PRISMA checklist, this is for systematic reviews. There's also one for scoping reviews. You should look at these and go through and make sure that you've addressed every component. You can write a sentence in your methodology that describes that you utilize the PRISMA checklist, and I'll show you an example of that in a bit. You don't need to turn in the PRISMA checklist to any journal or for any purposes for this class. Again, here's another example of a systematic review with meta-analysis, and again, we talk about PRISMA as being a way to go through and check things off, making sure that you utilize an appropriate methodology. But Prisma is not an area for registration per se. That's Prospero. Prospero is where you would register your systematic reviews. And once you've registered, it'll give you a registration number, and that should be included in your paper. There is the Prisma flow diagram. Those are the diagrams that you've seen in each of those papers that show the search strategy. So those are downloadable from the Prisma website. I've also provided it within this week's module. And so there is the Prisma flow diagram there. And what you want to try to do is include as much information as you determine to be relevant within the process. You may not necessarily include all of these things, and that's okay. Here are some short videos that you can review about the Prisma process. These are there to supplement things. They're available for you if you need to access them. All right, here is Prospero, and the link there's also the link this week in this week's module. Prospero is where you would register a systematic review. If you're doing a systematic review, you want to go through that process. So you'll need to join and then log in. And then I have not personally done a registration with Prospero, but there is a step-by-step process to go through, and it'll probably take you between 30 minutes to an hour to complete. Same thing goes for the scope and review registration that we'll look at here in just a bit. So you want to go through and make sure you've addressed all of the different steps. Here is also a brief how-to video on how to register your systematic review. My recommendation would be, for those of you doing a systematic review, to join Prospero, log in, and then just go step by step through the process. Now, you might have a question like, did I do this right? Am I putting in the correct information? And the answer to that is, yes, you probably did it right. Don't worry about it. If there's an issue that comes up, they'll email you. But my experience is, at least with doing multiple scoping reviews, is that there isn't people checking your work. So the whole goal is to register things, but nobody's coming back and going, oh, you did this wrong, or maybe you should have done that, or you weren't complete enough information-wise here. Try not to get hung up on any areas that you maybe don't know the answer to. If you don't know the answer, just put not applicable. Here's the website for registering your scoping review, the Open Science Framework. You can just Google Open Science Framework. You'll need to sign up. And then there is a area in there for doing a new registration. Let me see if I've got this up here that I can pull up. There we go. And go to, so here is the Open Science Framework. Here is the one for the scope and review on weight stigma that I just published. If I go to my registrations, which is just outside of what you're able to see right now, these are different things that I've been involved with. So I've got a different student in a different program that's doing something here with the business side of physical therapy. And so you can see a variety of different scoping reviews, things that I have been involved with here. Now, if you go to add new, and I know you can't see that add new, you can then start to get in here. Do you have content for registration in an existing? So no, I don't have a existing one. And then pre-registration. So the typically generalized systematic review registration is the one I utilize. And from there, you just start putting in information, title, description, contributors. Put in all your contributors and email them. Even if Prospero might do this too, I'm not sure. You want to email everybody and just let them know that you're registering your scoping review or your systematic review in case you want to publish in the future. And so if they receive an email, that's what that is all about. Then down here, license. Basically, you're going to use this first one here. That's fine. That's basically saying it's open access. And then subjects, you're just, oh, okay, medicine, great. And then you just kind of keep working through, going from section to section. And again, there may be things that may be confusing, like type of review. You can put in a scoping review stages, current stage. It gives you some ideas there. And the current review stage might be, hey, I'm just writing it right now, currently in the writing phase, with anticipated submission December of 2025, and then start date sometime in January, end date sometime in December. And so you just fill out as much information. Again, if you don't know what to put in, just put not applicable at this time, or not, like funding, no funding for this particular publication. Prospero is going to be the same way. And so with Prospero, you just put in what you know and you leave out what you don't know. So here's an example here of how authors in this paper discussed their OSF registration. So they registered their systematic review with OSF. I would say systematic reviews, preferably with Prospero, OSF for your scoping reviews. Here's one, again, showing Prospero being utilized to prospectively register the systematic review. And up here within your methods, you're going to talk about using the Prisma checklist. Now, some journals may also have additional checklists, and if so, you need to complete that for them. And some journals, I said before, maybe don't require the Prisma to be turned in. It looks like this one does. Prisma flowchart must, oh, that's the Prisma flowchart, not the checklist. So Prisma flowchart must be provided, so that would go into the paper itself. Declare the Prisma reporting guidelines were followed, so you don't have to turn in the checklist, you just are highlighting that it was followed. And here's just a different way that the authors elected to talk about using the Prisma approach. So I'm just sharing these things because different ways that people will say things. Now, do scoping reviews require registration? Last year I wrote no, but now should probably put yes. So basically, if you're doing a scoping review, you need to register it. Now, this particular paper here, this was a scoping review that was published in Virtual Worlds, and they then put down that their review protocol was not published. So they didn't essentially register it, which is really interesting because Virtual Worlds was the journal that Rachel's paper got put into, and we did highlight that a scoping review protocol was published. So what now? What are we talking about here? Basically, what we're having to do is register your scoping review and register your systematic review. And this should not be seen as a scary thing, but it might take a half hour to an hour to complete. So if you're doing a scoping review, you need to register it with OSF. Also, take a look at potential journals of interest. Now, week 8, we're talking about journals of interest for you to potentially submit to. So if you already have an idea, take a look and see what those journals require. So we looked at the example here going back to Sports Health. They want the Prisma flow chart included within the publication and a declaration that the reporting guidelines were followed and to consider registering with Prospero. They aren't saying you have to, but they're saying to consider registering. And this is also interesting too, a minimum of 3 databases required for a comprehensive search. And so that's a valuable thing to look at here. A lot of times I focus on PubMed and CINAHL. Now, what's interesting here is they talk about Medline as being a separate search engine. What's interesting here is they're talking about Medline, PubMed, and they're closely related. And so you would assume that if you're searching PubMed, you're getting probably everything from Medline too. Ultimately, some journals want to have 3 or more search engines searched. Another potential to that could be just doing a Google-related search, Google Scholar, or just putting in Google and talking about exploring the first citations, 50 citations that were presented. That's something that we did in our current publication. I talk about this in week number 8, but Kate Turner from Occupational Therapy and myself, we just published in June here a new scoping review. And this particular journal wanted more than just PubMed and CINAHL. So we had initially done PubMed and CINAHL as our search strategies to come up with a certain number of articles, and they wanted a third one. And so what I ended up doing then was using Google Scholar and utilizing the aforementioned keyword combinations, and then keyword combinations that previously resulted in 100 or fewer citations were then entered into Google Scholar, and the first 50 entries were screened for each keyword combination. That helped to find 4 unique references. And so it's I think really valuable. That shows that you've done a comprehensive search. So having 3 or more is great. What's interesting is those 4 unique references weren't high quality studies, and that's something that CINAHL and PubMed do, is they really focus on the best journals. Sometimes there are journals out there that just haven't risen to the level of quality, but regardless, I was able to get 4 unique references, and I think that helped in the process to address concerns from the reviewers. Now back to here again. You're going to be registering. And so what does the Journal of Interest require? Do they require the checklist? Do they require any other checklist for you to do? And so with your scoping reviews, you're going to register with OSF. With your systematic reviews, you're going to register with Prospero. You should also identify the Prisma systematic review checklist and the Prisma scope and review checklists, and start reviewing those to make sure that you have everything you need for your paper. For this week, in the forum this week, what you're going to do is enter your registration information. So off to the side here is registration information associated with the weight stigma scope and review that Kate and I just published. And so what I want you to do is within the forum, just put in, here is your registration DOI, and then provide a link to the page. And that's all you need to do. Ultimately, you're going to write something like this within your paper. So, for example, a scoping review methodology was determined to be the appropriate study design to identify all forms of evidence related to the topic and to identify potential gaps in knowledge. Citation 42 there is, if I remember correctly, a Prisma related citation. So they've got those things available. Prospero has those also. And then I put in there the Prisma extension for scope and reviews checklist was used to guide the performance of this review. So that's valuable. And then the scope and review is registered with the Open Science Framework. And so just something simple like that says to the journal reviewers and the journal editors that all due diligence was performed to make sure that a complete project was done.